Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the weekly host challenge with Classical Pairings. I'm your host, Nick Johnson. Every week, Classical Music Indy is sending me a piece of local music and a local spirit, and I'm pairing the two together. Today, we're going to be listening to a piece of music by local composer Rob Funkhouser, performed by local group Forward Motion. We also have two local beverages this week, Eighth Day Distillery's rum, and a ginger beer by the Soda Guys out of Avon, Indiana. I'm going to be making a cocktail using these ingredients. I'm also going to talk just a little bit about the history of bitters, which is something we haven't really gone over with yet. So stay tuned for some music by Rob Funkhouser and a cocktail called the Indy Cooler. So to build this cocktail, what we're going to need is, first of all, this Eighth Day Distillery's rum. They make two different rums if you go to get it with curbside pickup. They have a Navy strength rum. I'm using the regular light rum, which is still a 90 proof rum. We're going to need this ginger beer from Avon, Indiana, the Soda Guys Handcrafted. This is really fantastic. I never actually had this before somebody dropped it off at my doorstep to make a cocktail out of it, which was quite a nice day. But it's got a really fantastic ginger bite, but like a really good smoothness. They use all real sugar in their sodas, really fantastic. And then we're going to be mixing this with Angostura and with orange. I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about bitters, and then we're going to go ahead and build this cocktail. So bitters are used in almost all cocktails, but I haven't been using them during this host challenge because I was trying to find ingredients that people who weren't really cocktail aficionados would have at home. But if you enjoy making cocktails at all, you really need to have a few bitters, a few bottles of bitters at your house. Today we're going to be using Angostura's orange bitters. The story of Angostura is actually really fascinating. Here's their original bitters. It's not from the Angostura tree. It actually comes from Angostura, Venezuela. And it was in the early 1800s, it was a design that was, or a recipe that was used to treat seasickness and indigestion and was sold to sailors. And in fact, most early bitters were medicinal and were used at pharmacies would have bitter dispensers where you could go and fill up your bitters to take at home. And the alcohol that was in them was largely a preservative, because bitters are made out of roots and herbs, sometimes fruit, sometimes bark, and some, often like secret recipes and that sort of thing. But then the alcohol preserves the sort of tincture, the combination that's in them. Now, around 1900, it became very common to start using bitters to flavor cocktails and to mix with alcohol to make a more complex and flavorful drink. So if you enjoy making cocktails at all, I highly recommend that you grab a few bottles of bitters. I mean, the classic two that you would start with are Angostura that I just mentioned and Pachodes. Pachodes was originally from New Orleans, is now made in Kentucky actually, but it's used in cocktails like the Sazerac. But there are many different other types of bitters you can get and you can experiment with. For example, there's dark chocolate bitters. There are celery bitters. We tend to use these in dirty martinis. Cherry bitters, and these are just a couple of the ones that I have. But they're really a lot of fun to just play and experiment, and they often sort of bring out different notes of the alcohol, which is what actually happened in building today's cocktail. So let's go ahead and walk through the steps of making the Indy Cooler. So this drink, I wanted to use, I was given this ginger beer and a rum, and so I wanted to come up with a cocktail that, there's various things you might think of, like dark and stormy. I wanted to do something a little bit different. And in particular, I wanted to have some interplay between ginger and orange, which I think is a really fascinating flavor profile. And as we'll see, I think it mixes really well with the music we'll be listening to. So to make this drink, first we're going to start with 1 ounce of Eighth Day's rum. This is a very delicious rum that honestly you could just drink chilled by itself, or as I found out yesterday, just a splash of orange bitters in this is really delicious. So that was 1 ounce of rum. We're gonna do, usually with bitters, you would give it like 2 shakes. I'm actually gonna give this extra bitters because I want a lot of the orange flavor. So I'm giving that about 4 or 5 shakes of bitters. We're gonna do 1.5 ounces of this ginger beer. This has a very sharp ginger taste that is going to be, but like in a very pleasant and delicious way, mixing with the sweetness of the soda. And in particular, I love the way that this ginger interacts with orange flavor. So that was 1.5 ounces of this soda. And now we're simply going to garnish this with an orange peel, or just a little bit of orange rind. So you can just cut a little piece off of that. You know, I go to a lot of bars around Indianapolis, and the bartenders are way better at cutting off these pieces than I am. Mine never look pretty, but they still taste fine, and that's okay. Someday maybe I'll get better at this. So you can you can kind of crack the orange peel over the drink, and some oils will sort of drip down into it out of the peel. You can also, and I am going to do it for this drink, sometimes it's overpowering, but you can even just rub this around the edge of the glass. Since I'm wanting a lot of orange flavor, I'm going to do that. We actually experimented making this drink with some orange juice in it, but it was just a little too powerful that way. We're going for some subtlety. And now we go ahead and mix this up. So a Caribbean cooler, where I got this name, is ginger beer, light rum, and lemon. But I just really like the way ginger and orange interact, so that's why I'm now calling this the Indy Cooler. All right, so now that you have your Indy Cooler in hand, let's go ahead and talk about this piece of music by Rob Funkhouser. So he's actually a good friend of mine, and he's a local avant-garde composer and percussionist. Back when concerts were happening, if you frequented any sort of modern classical music concerts, you probably ran into Rob fairly often, and I can't wait to hear him again perform once we're able to do so. What I love about Rob's music, and you won't really hear it necessarily in this piece, but is the way that he can take any found object and turn it into a brilliant and creative musical instrument. He can take a cigar box or music boxes or pieces of metal and hit them in different ways, or a piece of cardboard I've seen him use before in a composition. But he comes up with sounds that are all really beautiful. And he's, I think, as opposed to some avant-garde composers, Rob's music, there is something that is very kind of arrestingly beautiful about it. Like it's almost surprising, the sort of glory that's still found within the piece of music. In this piece, Reflect and Release, the second movement we're going to be listening to, In a Garden, though please go listen to the whole piece. There's something about it that's almost like aggressively meditative. It will give you a kind of trance feeling with its sort of subtle energy and beauty, and it's this very atmospheric composition. And I think it sort of uses these subtle notes, and that's sort of what I was thinking about when I came to this cocktail, this subtle blend of orange and ginger. And when you listen to this piece, there's this blend of cello and clarinets and percussion piano that gives this, the way that Rob blends all these voices of this group forward motion is really clever. And I think that it's a calming piece. You're only going to hear just a little bit of it now, but I really recommend that you listen to this whole composition because these are all local musicians doing some really fantastic things. So let's go ahead and give Reflect and Release a listen. This is by Rob Funkhouser and performed by Forward Motion. Cheers. So thank you so much for listening to this little snippet of Reflect and Release. Go find the rest of the piece on YouTube, performed by Forward Motion. You can also go to Rob Funkhouser's website, and he's got a couple essays up about his compositional process about this piece that are really interesting. Today we made the Indy Cooler to pair with this piece of music. We've got 8th Day Distillery's rum. You can go and get that in curbside pickup. And we have the Soda Guys Handcrafted Ginger Beer from Avon. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.